Hello, it's Michelle, and welcome to my July 2014 reading wrap-up. During the month of July, I finished 21 books, but only 8 of them are in this video. 7 of them were included in my video for the BookTubeAthon Wrap Up, and 6 of them were included in my wrap-up for the Underhyped Reads readathon. So I'll put links to those videos down below if you're interested in checking those out and haven't already. So, the first book that I finished in July was World of Trouble by Ben H. Winters. And this is the 3rd book. It is the conclusion to a trilogy called The Last Policeman. And you follow Hank Palace, and he was on the police force, and they find out an asteroid is going to hit the Earth, and it's going to be devastating. And so society starts breaking down, and people start doing things they wouldn't normally do if they didn't believe that the end of the world was coming. So he is quickly promoted to a detective, and despite all the chaos going on in the world, he is extremely dedicated to solving the case that he is given in the first book, and also in the 2nd and 3rd book. He kind of never gives that up, and I thought that was brilliant on the part of the author, because here you have this main character who isn't really reacting to all the craziness and the impending doom. And so the reader doesn't have to decide, oh, that's not what I would have chosen, or that's not what I would have done. You don't run into that. The main character gets to observe all kinds of reactions, and I thought that was a brilliant part of the writing. This book kept the same kind of pace and tone as the other books, but this book does start out 14 days from impending doom. So I really enjoyed it. Gave it 4 out of 5 stars on GoodReads, just like the previous 2 books. Love the series and highly recommend it. Next up, I read Rebel Heart by Moira Young, and this is book 2 in the Dustlands trilogy. And we are still following Saba. She is reunited with her brother. The sister is there, but they are separated from Jack at the beginning. And the story kind of goes on with the same tone. There's a lot of action, but it's more like group attacks versus like physical combat one-on-one type situations. I love how this main character is tough as nails and yet is not perfect. She doesn't always know what to do, and that frustrates her, and she can't always see the right choice to make, or she struggles with what's good for her versus what's good for a group, and I love that aspect of it. Another thing that I really particularly enjoyed in this book was a new character that was introduced that goes by the name of Slim, and I just thought he added a lot of comedy and was just a terrific character to add. But I did give Rebel Heart 4 out of 5 stars. Next, I picked up Deceptive Innocence by Kira Davis. I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that correctly. I had read a new adult series of hers that was 3 books, but they're all very short. They're all around 100 pages, so it's really kind of like 3 novellas that could be bound up into one novel. And so this is the same type of formula with Deceptive Innocence. Just one night, the first book's called The Stranger, and I absolutely adored it because it was about a whole lot more than the romance that was going on in the book. And that story was just engrossing, and it was just really intriguing to read and figure out, what are they going to do? Oh, what's going to happen? A lot of that suspense there. So Deceptive Innocence, I wasn't quite as impressed. The story follows Belle, and when she was a child, her mother was, I believe, a housekeeper or something for a wealthy family who is in banking. And they frame her mother for murder, and her mom goes off to prison and dies in prison. And so she has a mean streak of revenge in her, and her plan to get revenge on that family is to seduce the youngest son named Lander and work her way into the family's folds and gain their trust, and then ultimately betray them again. And this one just kind of fell a little flat for me, so if you wanted to pick one Kira Davis series to read, I would highly recommend Just One Night over Deceptive Innocence. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars on GoodReads. It was enjoyable, but it wasn't nearly on par with the other series. Then I finished Red Rising by Pierce Brown, and I read this with one of my GoodReads groups, Flights of Fantasy. It was this young adult, I believe, pick of the month. And it's set on Mars, and it mainly follows a character named Darrow, and he is of the Red class, and there are classes based on color. And the Red class's job is to mine deep under the surface of Mars. It's very dangerous, it's very oppressive, it's hard work, they die young, they party hard. And he figures out that, they're mining this material that is going to be used to terraform and bring all the classes to Mars. Well, after years and years and generations of this, they finally figure out, or at least Darrow does, that most of the planets are terraformed, and the Red class is just being treated like slaves. And so he's going to do whatever he can to get back at the class that rules, and that is the Gold class, even if that means joining them. And the thing I loved about this book was you start out and the world is small and tiny, and you really feel like you know what's going on. And then you get a glimpse, and it kind of grows a little bit, and you're like, oh my gosh, okay, now I've got to learn kind of all how these rules work. And at the end of the book, you can see where at the beginning of the second book, it's going to kind of broaden horizons again. And I love that about books. It reminded me a lot of reading the Honor Harrington series by David Weber. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I thought it was great. And book 2, The Golden Sun, I cannot wait for it to come out, and I will be getting my hands on that copy. All right, then I read A Different Me by Deborah Blumenthal, and this was a NetGalley preview copy that I got in exchange for an honest review, and it's about a young lady who is not happy with the way her nose looks, and it really kind of overpowers most of her thoughts, and she's really obsessive about it. And there are a couple of situations that she describes that led her to feel this way, and so you do kind of feel like she's a little justified in it. She doesn't really feel comfortable talking to her parents about it very much, and she doesn't feel comfortable talking to her friends about it, and so she turns to an online community and discussion boards, and she meets 2 friends about her age, and they develop a friendship and start, comparing notes as they look into doctors and schedule surgeries, and they all 3 end up having very different experiences, and so it was neat to see that. But the thing I loved the most about this book was how the main character has this kind of dialogue with herself about, will changing my outward appearance change how I feel about myself on the inside, and which one matters, and that kind of thing. So I thought that was beautiful. I gave this 4 out of 5 stars on GoodReads. All right. Then I read The Revised Fundamentals of Caregiving, and the price dropped on this on Kindle Books, and it just kind of grabbed my attention. And the book basically follows Ben, and Ben is probably in his late 30s, if I remember correctly. And he has had a tragedy in his family involving the deaths of his 2 young children. His marriage falls apart. His life falls apart. And he's trying to put the pieces back together, and one step he's taking towards that, he took a class in caregiving. And he ends up earning a position taking care of a young man named Trevor, who is 19 and has muscular dystrophy and can't really do much physically for himself beyond feeding himself and changing the channel on the television. So it's a lot of physical work that he has to do. Trevor's dad is not in the picture, and Trevor's mom is just this steadfast rock for Trevor to lean on. Trevor's dad is trying to make his way back into the picture, but both the son and the mother are making that a little difficult for him. So Trevor is happy to have kind of a guy to hang out with as his caregiver versus an old lady, and they do get a little bit raunchy with their discussions at times. Probably if I had looked up some of the things they were talking about, I would have been disgusted, but I chose to just kind of gloss over that section of the book. In the end, Ben and Trevor convince Trevor's mom that they need to go on a road trip. They've been kind of planning it for fun, knowing Trevor will never be able to go, but then they finally convince her and they take off on this road trip. And it is just this gritty, hard luck contemporary that is just sprinkled with the true meaning of life moments throughout. I gave it 4 stars on Goodreads, and that was written by Jonathan Edison. Then it was the BookTubeAthon, and then it was the Underhyped Books Readathon, and so those videos obviously are linked below. And then I finished 2 other books in July. I had actually finished both of these books before the readathons occurred. The first one is Ancillary Justice. Basically, the story follows an artificial intelligence that used to be a ship, and there's just this really interesting concept in the book where they take human bodies that have been frozen and they kind of insert the artificial intelligence into the bodies, and the ship can control not only the ship but also all of these bodies. So there was this neat concept of I could see myself orbiting the system and look down at the system, but at the same time, I was standing in the temple watching over this officer, and at the same time, I could see myself on patrol out the door talking to a citizen. So it's just a unique concept that I'd never really come across before and thought it was pretty interesting to read about. There was also a very unique to me situation that the leader of the system got themselves into, and I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not going to tell you what it was, but the Lord of the Ratch basically gets himself into a conundrum that I'd never experienced before in my reading travels. I probably would have given this a 4 out of 5, but there was something that just really brought down my reading enjoyment for this book, and the AI, the artificial intelligence, of course doesn't really care about the gender of a human, but some of the languages that it speaks do care and some don't. And so you would meet this character, and by default, the artificial intelligence would say she and her, and so you would think you were talking about a woman. And then a couple chapters later, they would be speaking in a language that did pay attention to gender pronouns, and all of a sudden they were a he. And that just really confused me, and I had trouble keeping the characters in a box inside my head, and so I was constantly doubting, am I remembering this story correctly? Was I confused? I thought this was a man, and now they're saying it's a woman, or vice versa. So that really brought down my enjoyment, and I ended up giving it a 3 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. And the last book that I finished in July was Dune by Frank Herbert. This was a book that was picked up by the BookTube Reading Buddies group, and I thought, well, this is probably my best shot at ever completing this classic. And my husband was pumped. He wanted me to read it, and I thought, this is probably my best chance at finishing it when it's a kind of a read-along situation and I can discuss it. Well, the language is just so cryptic, and for the first 120 pages, nothing happened other than characters were trying to analyze what other characters were doing and what their motives were and why they would be doing that and what it all meant. And all it was conjecture, and that really bothered me. So finally, about 120 pages into this behemoth of a book, something happened, but it wasn't very exciting and it wasn't very interesting. But I kept reading because I'm a finisher for the most part in most things in my life, and I was just so disappointed in the end. When things do start to happen, by that point there has been so much conjecture and crypticness in the writing that I just didn't care what happened to the characters one way or another, and I'm happy that I finished it so I can kind of check that off of my reading bucket list and not have to pick it up again, but it will definitely not be anything that I ever reread, and I gave it 2 out of 5 stars on Goodreads. Good story, but just dated and cryptically written. So that was my July. If you've read any of these and agree or disagree, I would love to hear about it. Thanks for watching, and happy reading.